Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Today we're going to talk about something I absolutely love to do, and that's fish docks. You know, growing up here in northern part of Wisconsin, where most of my fishing took place, flipping and pitching is one of my absolute favorite things to do. So for me, fishing docks is almost like a natural target. I enjoy fishing docks because I enjoy trying to get my bait back into areas where other people haven't fished. So I truly enjoy the act of fishing docks, but the reality is docks are extremely good fish holding targets. No matter where you're at in the country, fish will hold or will use docks to stage for all different parts of the yearly, fish movement cycles. And it's just something where it doesn't even have to be bass. Most species will use docks at some time or another, and that's what makes them so good. They are isolated pieces of structure on a bank that provide shade, they provide cover, they provide warmth in cold water periods, and they provide really good ambush spots for fish to feed on whatever forage species that they're after. So a dock is really a good place to key in on. Now they do fluctuate a little bit based on where you're at in the country. For instance, up here in the north by me, we don't have floating docks. Our docks are pole-based docks. They could be, big wooden poles. They could be just metal poles. In either case, we have, ice that forms in the winter and that would destroy a lot of floating docks. So we don't have floating docks. Down south, where you have a lot of water fluctuation, where you may have 15 feet of water fluctuation, you've got floating docks, because if you had a pole dock, it would be way out of the water by the time you had it. So the types of docks are different. But the reality is that fish use them in very, very similar manners across the country. And they just are fantastic fish holding areas, which make them great places for us to fish. The biggest hindrance, though, that anglers have when fishing docks are getting their baits to where the fish are. Docks can be somewhat of an intimidating thing to fish if you're not a very experienced caster. For instance, if you're fishing a pole dock, you may have to skip your bait way back under the pole. But if you've got docks that have cross beams, or you have docks that have posts that have wheels and different things, you can get snagged a lot, especially if you don't understand the dock itself. If you're fishing, say, down south where you've got a floating dock, you're probably going to have cables running all over the place, so you can get stuck on cables all the time. So bait choice is really important anytime you're fishing docks. And that's what I want to talk about today. So I've got a really good selection of baits here that I'm telling you, these will be probably the most productive baits that you can choose when fishing docks. It not just necessarily this time of year, but all year long, these are baits that are going to work. And we see them used time in and time out anytime people are fishing docks, but that's because they're very effective at fishing the dock and they get bid. So that's really what you're looking for. Okay, the other thing you need to recognize is the majority of fish that are holding on docks are going to be in one of two places. They're either going to be high up in the water column, right near the surface, either suspended under floats of a floating dock, or if you have poles, they'll be suspended up in the top right next to one of your poles. The second place that they most likely are going to be is on the bottom. So, if you're fishing a pole dock that's in 6 feet of water, they're going to be down on the bottom in 6 feet of water. If you're fishing a floating dock that's in 30 feet of water, they're probably going to be also on the bottom in 30 feet of water, just sitting in the same shade patch that dock's providing, just at a deeper level. You occasionally will get fish that are suspended at different levels, but the two most productive places are high in the water column and low in the water column. So what that means is you want to choose a bait that is either going to be most effective high in the water column or low in the water column. So the best baits, in my opinion, if you're fishing higher up in the water column, is let's start with the first one, a swim bait. So a swim bait could be a big swim bait like this 6.8. This is a Kitech, but a big swim bait, or it could be a much smaller swim bait like this 3.3 power swimmer. In either case, The key with a swim bait is this can be a very good bait to skip far back into areas. You can rig them weedless or exposed, whatever you feel most comfortable with, but they generate a lot of bites. You can retrieve, a swim bait directly underneath the surface. So if it's along a floating dock, right under the floating dock, you can retrieve it along the pillars. The two best ways to fish it, in my opinion, is either with an exposed hook. If you know you've got, let's say, a floating dock with a bunch of water underneath it, and you know what direction the cables go, at that point, you don't have to worry about throwing an exposed hook. So therefore, if I'm throwing like this 3-3 power swimmer, I'll put it on just my little guppy head. If I'm skipping this way back under some pole docks, or I've got a bunch of cables I got to worry about, I can rig this on a belly weighted big, EWG style hook that I then will make this weedless because it's essentially Texas rigged. And I can skip this back pretty much almost anywhere. But a swim bait is really a key tool for fishing docks around the country. The other nice thing about, just throwing, say, a jig-headed exposed hook is you can retrieve this right under the surface. And if that's not working, you can simply switch over, let the bait sink to the bottom, and retrieve it along the bottom. So you can really cover a lot of water with a swim bait. The other bait, and this is along the same lines again, that I really, really like for fishing higher up in the water column is a swim jig. A swim jig is an absolutely deadly dock fishing bait. This is just the Dirty Jigs regular swim jig. I've got a Boss Scrub, a Berkeley Boss Scrub on the back. The idea here is you're mimicking a bait fish, and again, it's meant to be retrieved higher up in the water column. So, if I'm fishing around dock posts, I can skip this around dock posts. If I'm fishing around floating docks, I can retrieve it right under the floating dock. The reason I love a swim jig so much, though, is because it's a very weedless bait. So if I've got cables in the water, brush piles under the dock posts, or cross beams on dock posts, I can skip this way back and I can retrieve it back knowing that I've got a very good chance of not getting hung up, and it catches a lot of really good fish. So it's a really good bait. It skips really well, nice and compact. It's a great dock fishing bait. I have probably, I'm going to say I've cashed $100,000 worth of money on a swim jig, fishing it around docks. Like, I've cashed a lot of checks. If you're fishing places like Martin Lake in Alabama, or right now they're on Hartwell. The Classic was just at Hartwell. Places like that, you can see a swim jig really do well. In that case, I'd probably be throwing a white colored one that mimics the shad or blueback herring. But up here in the North Country, it's a fantastic bluegill imitating bait for fishing around docks. So don't underestimate a swim jig if you're fishing docks. So then that takes us to the other three baits I want to show you for fishing deeper in the water column. The first, and potentially the most well-known dock fishing bait, is a good jig. This is what I think is the best skipping and dock fishing jig out there. This is the Matt Herron, Dirty Jigs Matt Herron flipping jig. One thing I want to point out with this is if you look at the line tie on it, the line tie on it is it would be perpendicular to the hook shank, which in my opinion makes it much more weedless if you're fishing around dock cables, if you're fishing around brush piles that are under docks, or you have cross beams under docks. That line tie angle will prevent you from getting stuck more, because when it comes up, if my hand is the say the dock post, you bring it up, the line tie will actually bring the head up and over, keeping the hook shank up in the air, versus if you have a hook eye angle that is parallel to the hook shank, that'll pull in, and then your bait will rotate in one of the two directions. And when that happens, your hook is brought closer to any potential snag, and therefore you'll get stuck more often. So you want a perpendicular line tie when you're flipping docks with a jig. The key, though, with a jig is really to have a nice compact bait with a relatively quick fall. Normally, in my opinion, works better, but it just is an outstanding bait for covering the sweetest parts of the dock. So, you know, wherever the fish are at, you can be very efficient with a jig. You can skip a jig back into the areas that you want to get your bait into, and it catches some very, very big fish. So a jig like the Matt Heron here is a phenomenal jig to use. And that's potentially one of the most famous baits for fishing docks. But that's because it works. It's weedless. You can get it to where you want it to go, and it gets bit. All right, so then we've got two more here that I want to talk about. So this is a Max Scent Hitworm. This is the Magnum size, or the regular size I like as well. The key here is just the shaky head. This is the bait that I like to throw on a shaky head. And again, this is similar to throwing your swim baits. You've got two hook styles that, you know, I think you can use. You can use your just basic exposed hook. So this is just the Dirty Jigs Clausen shaky head. It's a round ball head style. So the hook point is going to be exposed. Or you can go with something like this horseshoe shaky head that is going to allow you to rig it in a Texas style and therefore be weedless. Again, I like to get away with the exposed bait anytime I can, but if I know I've got a bunch of cables or I'm fishing brush piles, that's when you want to throw a shaky head that you can make your bait weedless. But the key here is just with a shaky head, you can get this bait down, you can fish it on the bottom. It's meant to be on the bottom, but you can skip it really well back into the dock, open your bail, let the bait free fall to the bottom, and just work it real slow back from that dock. It's another really proven fish catching bait anytime you're fishing around docks. The last one, again, is no secret for most people. You grab your favorite stick bait. I like the Max Scent General. Rig it wacky, and you throw that thing as far back under the docks as you can get. It is probably the #1 bait in terms of getting the most bites. The one thing I'll say though is if you're fishing deeper docks, you do not want to overlook a wacky rig. You just got to let it fall longer. Like, you got to have the patience to let this bait fall into 15 or 20 feet of water, but it definitely gets bit. It's that slow fall that just, you know, as we all know, a wacky rig can be deadly, and it's that slow fall that triggers those fish into biting. So it's a bait that you actually can work high up in the water column as well as low in the water column. But in any case, it's a bait you have to have when you're fishing docks because of the fact that you can skip it back into pretty much any corner of a dock or wherever you need it to go, but it gets bit really, really well. So those are the baits I have. If I know I'm going dock fishing, those 5 baits I'm going to have tied on every single time. I very rarely will go with anything else. Occasionally I might work in like a jerk bait along the sides of the dock, but you know, really the problem with that is if you make a bad cast, you're stuck on the dock. If you go a little deeper than you thought, you get stuck on a dock cable. Maybe there's a cross beam you weren't aware of. You get stuck, and then you've got a jerk bait that's hanging up under dock. You're probably not going to get there. So you need a bait that is relatively weedless and is going to allow you to get the bait back to where those fish are at. That's the hard part. So I hope it was helpful, guys. Don't overlook any of these baits anytime you're out fishing docks. Don't overlook docks. Docks are like the best target to fish. Sometimes you can have whole schools of fish underneath them. You can go up and catch 3-4 fish out of one dock. That happens a lot. So I hope it was helpful, guys. If it was, hit the like button. Stay tuned for tomorrow's video. We got another good one coming.